This is Update One, the podcast of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Update One provides a forum for listeners to learn about national and international stories, focusing on journalism and communication issues, news, and politics. Now, the latest edition of Update One.
Hello, I'm Adam Konowe, a co-vice chair of the National Press Club's Broadcast Podcast Committee. I'm joined by Shelley Spector, a veteran public relations practitioner and lecturer. Shelley founded the Museum of Public Relations in 1997. It's a 501c3 chartered by the New York Board of Regents, and she joins us today by phone from New York to talk about a new exhibit. Shelley, welcome back to Update One.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
Before we talk about the new exhibit, can you kind of remind our listeners a little bit about the 5 W's of the Museum of Public Relations, what it is and why and all that?
Okay, sure. Well, I can start with when. The idea for the museum was given to us by Edward Bernays himself, whom my husband and I were very good friends with. He was around 101, and I asked him what he was going to do with all the stuff that was in his house. You know, these old 8x10 pictures of himself with Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Calvin Coolidge, etc. And he said, I'd like to create a museum. And he asked us to create a museum in New York for public relations, and that it would be the first one. He would, when he passed, give us the founding materials for the exhibit. And here we are 22 years later, and we have a nice space downtown Manhattan that remains the only museum of public relations in the world.
Wow, that's amazing. And so what can we learn from the past, especially as it pertains to things like messaging and audiences?
Okay. Well, I think one of the most interesting things is that the museum is set up sort of like an Edward Bernays and Doris Fleischman Bernays office of 1919. And you won't find any electronics in here other than a lamp. And there's an old telephone, there's an old typewriter, there's a souvenir light bulb from Thomas Edison. And you realize that 100 years ago, people who were practicing, which included, just really 2 people, Bernays and Ivy Lee, they didn't have the Internet. And in a pre-digital age, what really powered the profession was not obviously social media, but was ideas and brilliant campaigns and strategies. So Bernays was the first to go out and actually research his audiences before he created a campaign. And he did this because he was influenced to a large extent by his double uncle Sigmund Freud. So he had a real interest in social psychology and understood people's subconscious, understood their insecurities, how to appeal to them, to their egos. And so here he is, the inventor, so-called, of this profession, and he's coming out and talking about the psychological aspects of his various audiences. And that was very, very considered scientific back 100 years ago. So, and then he would actually measure the impact of the campaigns and tie it into sales. So the things that Bernays was up to 100 years ago were far more advanced than I think people to this day imagine. And that's why it's such a delight when people come in here and they hear these stories and they look at all these materials and say, my God, in so many ways the profession has changed, but in so many ways it has not.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that a little bit later, but I'm curious about the reactions of young people today when they come into the museum and see this. I mean, in a sense, it must be public relations in a very, very pure form.
Exactly. It's really the fundamentals is what I like to teach. And I have them sometimes sitting by this computer from 1905 and a candlestick phone from 1904 and a telegraph. And say, this is all you have. And you are now responsible for putting out some news on behalf of a client. How do you get this press release in your typewriter out to the editor's office? How do you do that? It's not hooked into other typewriters. There's no networking involved, and they really have to think this through. It's amazing how this generation, which is the first to grow up entirely on the Internet, cannot conceive of a world that is non-digital. And so we have to talk about how do you create something that's newsworthy enough that editors are going to want to run with it or at least interview your client, but how do you do something as simple as getting a press release from your typewriter and over to an editor's office? Well, or sometimes you put it in an envelope and you put an address on it. And these are things that the kids have no idea about. These very simple matters that you and I kind of grew up with, unfortunately, don't have to do anymore. But the kids are really struck by the lack of technology.
This podcast originates from the Broadcast Operations Center of the National Press Club, and we're here in the National Press Building. And I always like to tell guests that one of the unique things about this building is it has its own zip code, and that dates from a pre-internet age when everything came in and out of this building, and all the news bureaus that are here, in addition to the club itself, that everything that came in and out of here, press releases, videotape, audio tape, media kits, that everything moved in a obviously pre-internet physical way.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, even 100 years ago, not everybody had a telephone, right? So even if you were lucky to have one on your desk, like we are here, this phone is a candlestick model from 1904. If you made phone calls to the editors, you're not sure that they would even have a telephone number. And it was a whole different world that depended entirely on brain power and your creativity or imagination, doing something different. I mean, everything that Ivy Lee and Bernays and even Paul Garrett and Arthur Page, they were doing things for the very first time. They had to be very inventive. And I think that when the young people come in here and they hear about these campaigns, they find out this concept of newsworthiness, which I feel today is very much lacking in the colleges and even in the workplace.
I want to get back to that perhaps at the end as we talk about kind of what to derive from all of this, especially given that a large percentage of National Press Club members are communicator members, so they're not working journalists. They are on that public relations side. So let's talk a little bit about the museum's newest feature. So this is a collection of more than 50 items related to Harold Burson. So who was he, or who is he, and what items are on display?
Okay. Harold was a fascinating guy. He is a fascinating guy. He's 98 and a half. I've been interviewing him since 2002. He was a prolific writer from a very early age. When he always wanted to be a journalist. When he got into school, they immediately skipped him 2 grades. He started working at the Memphis Commercial Appeal when he was 11. He paid his way through college, through Ole Miss, when at the age of 15, and he was a stringer for his hometown paper, which, by the way, he's relocating back to Memphis next week. And wow. I was kidding with him that they're going to hire him again to be a correspondent. And eventually, he joined the service, and after the war, he had been working for the information department, and after the war, they hired him to report on the Nuremberg trials. So he wrote the radio scripts that were read by Armed Forces Radio, and we have copies of them here in the museum. It's unbelievable writing, unbelievable, and such vivid descriptions of the defendants who were people, the Nazis that you and I know too well. And here Harold himself is a Jewish guy, and writing about these and seeing the films that the Army started showing as evidence of what the Nazis were up to. And a few years after he came home, he decided he wanted to open a PR firm. A lot of the young men who were in the service came back to New York, around 200 of them, in the late 40s, and opened up one-man PR firms. This is something that we typically don't think about. But several of the names that we hear today, like Finn and Golan and Fleischman, they all started from being public relations experts during the war, and they came out and started their own agencies. Burson, like the others, started. He had a desk in a client's office. This was an engineering company that he had worked for briefly before the war. And he hired this girl that he had been dating, eventually married her, named Betty, then made a second hire. And soon he was contacted by an ad agency in Chicago, the Marsteller agency, and they asked him to do some publicity for a company called Rockwell International, which fortunately Burson knew of, and he understood how to write about engineering because he had represented an engineering company before the war. And he achieved, incredible success right out of the gate. He got a 3-page spread in Life magazine, and that over Thanksgiving week. And Bill Marsteller was just so impressed with him. They started talking about merging the two companies in 1952. And in 1953, the merger of the two companies, and this was the first time an ad agency and a PR firm are getting together. So this was the beginning, you could say, of integrated marketing, although they didn't call it that back then.
Wow. So, as you said, Mr. Burson is now 98 years old, so it must have been very special to have him present for the exhibit's opening.
Oh, my God. What we decided to do was, unlike our other events at the museum where we, open it up to everybody, we just decided to have young people. So we had summer interns who were here from all over the world working in the city during the summer, and we had students come. So we had about 100 young people, having their opportunity to take pictures. Everybody loves taking selfies with Harold, and, we had to make it so it was group shots. But before the picture taking, we didn't plan for Harold to be talking. We didn't want to put that pressure on him. But I saw he was itching to get something out, and so I took one question from the audience, which was, how did he feel about human nature after covering the Nuremberg trials? And Harold just started talking for 40 minutes nonstop, and he was entertaining, lucid, absolutely wonderful. And you can look at the tape that we made. It's on our Facebook page. Just inspiring, and he was talking directly to the young people in the audience about the skills they needed to acquire. I thought he was going to say that writing was the number one skill, but no, he said it was networking. He said it was, especially when you're young, make as many contacts as you possibly can, and those will grow exponentially.
What was the reaction of the young people to his commentary?
Oh, just loved it, smiling. Everybody was had their phones out, and they were taping him, of course.
Of course.
And tweeting about it.
So when he saw these 50 items or so on display, was there one that in particular that he gravitated towards, or did he have any sort of feedback on seeing this part of his history and the history of all of us who work in public relations?
He will go to any one of those pieces. I mean, I'm walking around the museum right now. For instance, he has the Coke can from when he did the launch for New Coke, and Coca-Cola had put his name on it, just share a Coke with Harold. He loves the press release, which is framed from 1953, announcing the formation of Burson-Marsteller, and it's all blue typed, of course, because it's a carbon copy. You remember those? Yeah. And he typed it was from his typewriter, and so he's sitting there with this on his lap, and the kids are nearby reading it, and it was just so crisply written. Loved it. He even has quotes from himself in here, and it was 1 3/4 pages long, and it's just a remarkable piece of our history. And he has several photos of himself, signed photos with Reagan and Jimmy Carter and Clinton. There's a handwritten letter from Ronald Reagan. I mean, you get, of course, typewritten letters from presidents, but this is the only one that I've seen from Reagan that is just a personal letter that that he handwrote. Sincerely Ron, just like he was getting it from his, his friend, from his army buddy, They were very good friends. And so from these 50 objects, you learn a lot about the guy. And, that's what's true about all the objects in here. The objects in here just tell stories about different people, different periods of time, different events over the course of history. And I think it's very inspiring, even if you're not in public relations.
What's your favorite artifact?
My favorite artifact is an article in Fortune magazine from March 1939 that is the first and last time Fortune magazine covered the PR industry, and is a very wonderful, positive, respectful story, as if they were covering the legal field or technology. And the headline is, "The public is not damned. On the contrary, under the mysterious head of, quote, public relations, the modern businessman finds that he must either cajole it, satisfy it, or lead it." And the article goes on to describe, with pictures, different public relations activities from companies around the country. And to me, this is one of the most valuable pieces that we have here, because it shows that at least during that decade in the 30s, public relations was not just thriving, but it had amassed a terrific following from CEOs. And that's when public relations agencies really started taking off during this period of time. And I'd love you to see it. I wish this was, we had a TV camera here, because I'm flipping through this article, and it's just not to be believed. People come here and they shoot pictures of this. They also have in here, Fortune went to the trouble of hiring a cartoonist to illustrate funny things about public relations. And one of them is two receptionists by a switchboard. And it says, ask that public relations man what to say when a customer asks, "Hey, babe, how about Thursday night?" It's also a reflection of, the sexism that was just so pervasive during that time that even women didn't realize it was going on.
Absolutely. So as you walk through that museum and you see those artifacts and you understand how they reflected, like you said, the sexism and other aspects of the age, but you also try to derive something for now, as the young people did when they were there with Mr. Burson. What do you take away? What's the one bottom line that you take away from not just this new exhibit, but from the museum in general, for the benefit of communicator members here at the National Press Club, journalists with whom we interact with every day, the students that you and I teach at our respective universities? What makes preserving the past still so important in the realm of public relations?
I think that I have a lot of answers to that, but one of the most important things that I feel is that we see people here from all over the world. And I think that what they sense, these are practitioners from, had from Slovakia last week, South Korea, Monday somebody's coming up from Brazil. Everybody feels a community to the worldwide practice of public relations, because it all started really in New York, 2 blocks away from here. And I think that all the exhibits here together kind of pull everybody back to a common history so that we all feel a sense of professional community. These are our professional ancestors here, and they did such wonderful things. Not just the public relations professionals per se, but we also include in here social activists. For instance, Frederick Douglass is in here. People that you wouldn't normally look at as public relations people, but they advocated for social justice and equality, and they used public relations strategies and tactics to get the word out and to be persuasive. So that's something that's a very valuable takeaway for people, is to see how public relations can be used for the public good.
Shelley, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Adam. Thank you very much.
Shelley Spector is a PR practitioner and lecturer, as well as founder of the Museum of PR. You can learn more at prmuseum.org. For Update 1, I'm Adam Konowe.
Update 1 is a production of the National Press Club's Broadcast Podcast Committee. You can comment on this podcast or any episode of Update 1 by sending an email to update1podcast, that's update the number 1 podcast @gmail.com. Thanks for listening to Update 1.